Welcome to the DNA of Things, where we explore how our genetics, environment, and behavior shape our full potential. And this is where science meets transformation, unlocking the latent brilliance encoded within all of us. Now, today's guest is Adora Cheung, a serial entrepreneur and investor who co-founded Homejoy and later became a partner at YC. That's Y Combinator. And after years of grinding in startup culture, she realized that founders, like high-performing athletes, are burning out at an alarming rate. In this conversation, we explore the myths of hustle culture, the flaws of modern healthcare, and how personalized biometrics can transform longevity and peak performance with a special focus on those conscious creator entrepreneurs. All right, today I have the immense pleasure of welcoming Adora Cheung, a serial entrepreneur, investor, and trailblazer in the tech world, best known for co-founding Homejoy, a home services startup that expanded to 31 cities and actually later became a partner at Y Combinator, mentoring hundreds of startups, entrepreneurs, founders. And I think something she learned along the way, as evidenced by her quote here, "I'll deal with my health when my startup succeeds." Obviously, this is being facetious. That is Adora, is actually criticizing the mindset of entrepreneurs, herself included, so not endorsing it. Really, this notion that this paradigm is kind of sort of a vibe in general, is kind of, invincible hero attitude, perhaps, emphasizing, as it were, the importance of proactive health management for founders. And so here we are today, through this experience of even feeling the effects of neglecting her own health, we see the birth of InstaLab, which aims to make proactive healthcare more accessible to busy professionals, particularly startup founders, data-driven, and really pointing to the facts that are going to add, hopefully, decades of health span to your life. She now advocates for founders to prioritize their health alongside their startups rather than postponing it until they achieve their success. Because how fun would that be? Adora, welcome to the DNA of Things.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So you've got a really interesting and let's say diverse set of experiences behind you. And, of course, there, from your own initial startup and then mentoring many, many entrepreneurs. What I'm interested to hear is I definitely want to hear about some of those adventures, but just even that initial leap to say, hey, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Was that something that was a calling for you, something you knew you were always going to do? And I'd love for you to walk me through, that moment that you decided to take that course.
Yeah, I actually didn't know about startups, or I was a computer science major in college, but didn't know about startups, or really at that point there was like web programming. We were taught C++, C, a lot of desktop applications. And so when I graduated from college, I actually went to go get a PhD in economics because I couldn't figure out what kind of job I really wanted to do at the time, and I had done research, computer programming stuff for an economics professor. And so I was 4 years into that, actually, when a friend approached me from college about working on his startup. And that's when the whole wide world opened up to me. And I don't know if it was like a calling per se, but it was more of just this realization I can work on something that was my own, that had full equity in, that I could be my own boss. Definitely much harder than just getting a job at Joe Schmo company, but it just seemed like the more fascinating path for me. And I was very young at that time, so it wasn't like, I had kids to feed or anything like that, or mortgages to pay. So it was just like a good next step for me. And then I think when I started building stuff alongside other people, I joined I worked on a startup with my friend. It didn't work out, but I started learning how to just build product. Then I was product manager at another startup, and then I went to do my own. But just the idea of just building something from scratch, it's hard to describe what it is. And it is frustrating at times when you're doing that, because a lot of stuff you build, you just got to throw away, even if you spent months doing it. But the idea of seeing a user product and deriving tons of value from it is just another level of feeling I think you get. Then, again, at least for me anyway, from, working on at someone else's company. And so going from 0 to 1 to me is like the coolest thing in the world. There's another whole scaling it up from 1 to 1 billion or whatever it is. I think that's a completely different thing. But that's sort of what attracted me to entrepreneurship in the first
Mm,
place.
mm. Well, and so you've got a very good, well, let's say hero's journey just in Homejoy itself. You mentioned going 0 to 1, but then it was like kind of 1 to infinity. And so, what did you learn through that process? Because you guys raised quite a bit of capital. You're in 31 different countries. What did you notice when you went from, well, as you say, the iteration proof of concept phase, MVP, getting a few customers in versus, okay, everybody wants this and we're a real company now with real consequences and more bosses than you would ever have if you worked on your own. So what was that transition like?
It went, it's hard to describe. It went quite quick because we actually grew. I think it was within a year's time where we went from like barely having it together and like running out of money to raising a lot of money and growing really fast and getting on that track. And I think there's a lot of operational learnings I probably got away from that in terms of building company culture and stuff like that. I think I didn't spend enough time on that, but also it's one of those things where you're going so fast. It's like, what do you do? You're like, you go from a company of like 3 people to 300 people, and you sort of, there are several steps you miss along the way when you're going really fast. But yeah, it was it was a whirlwind, and I think there are a lot of things we could have put in place to safeguard the growth. And I tell a lot of people, it's like, I'm not saying don't grow fast, but there's always this, like when in a factory, when they're outputting widgets or whatever it is, products they're outputting, there's quality control there. And so if X% of the widgets come out defective, you need to stop, you need to, check on things and not stop. You don't need to stop production, but you need to slow down a little bit. And it's the same thing with any services company or startups or whatever. It's like you need to have some quality metric in place and threshold of where you set it at the beginning of when you start working on it. And then if you hit it at any point, you sort of take a step back and say, okay, what needs to be fixed? Because if you keep building on top of especially if you're growing very fast on top of something that's a bit, even just a little bit broken, it just exacerbates at some point. And so I kind of went off topic there, but that's sort of, I think, a lesson. There are a lot of many reasons why Homejoy didn't end up where I would have loved it to end up, but I would say that's the one generalized learning I can impart on people that's relevant to most companies.
You said something there. You said the word culture. From 3 to 300, and you're like, yeah, maybe I would have spent some more time on culture. I think you're, alluding to something like company design, right? Which is, I mean, that's just a whole fascination in and of itself. And I read a book recently called, recommended by a friend of mine, Brandon Larson. It's called The Big Five for Life by John Strzelecki, where what he brings it back to, and I think we've heard things like this by like Simon Sinek, start with why, that it's almost cliche at this point, but it's important to start with why, or as the author calls it, purpose for existence. But then you pair that with your big five for life, as the name of the book applies. We're the big five, and that's going to like overlap on different spheres. And so I think philosophically or theoretically, it sounds very good. You're getting people, well, I'm here because this aligns with my purpose for existence. Well, what my purpose for existence might be, I want to be a creator. I want to make something from scratch. But you could have a compliment with somebody who's like, I want to spend more time with my kids, and because of the nature of this job is like, oh, it could be fully remote. I could work from home, right? So you could work on multiple purposes of existence. I think the trick is, how do you get people to understand and know what each individuals are, and then the kind of big five that are supporting that as personal goals and aligning with company goals. And I'm saying all this, and I'm hearing how absurd it sounds when you're trying to move super fast, and you've got VC funding in that's looking at like, how do I get 10x, how do I get 100x in 2 to 3 years, because we're looking at a private equity play, and so there are all these kind of different forces that, I mean, I think if they're forces in the word, but different tensions that you feel, that we can feel as entrepreneurs. And I guess the question is, have you ever found a scenario where those things are so far at odds, they're kind of breaking you or entrepreneurs that you know? Or on the other side is like, what does it look like if all those things were lined up? Like all of that
Yeah.
tension, the tension of the VC, the tension of the angel investor, the tension of the employee, the tension of the customer are all tracking in the same
Yeah.
direction. So I bring that up because you have a ton of experience with the Y Combinator. You've met with hundreds of founders. You're an investor yourself. And I just wanted to kind of put that out there as a phenomena in terms of, oh, wow, it's a diversity of stakeholders, but how might they be unified, I guess?
Yeah. A common trope is VCs or board members who just keep whacking on the founder to grow, 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 grow at all costs and forget about everything else. And, that's true. That's partially true. They want you to grow, grow, grow. But I think, a really good board, if you put together a really good board, they're going and they trust you as a CEO and as the founder, you can push back. And so I wouldn't say it's ever perfect. I haven't never heard a situation where everyone was perfectly aligned. Even if you look at the top companies in the past 10, 20 years, you always hear something going on that there's some disagreement. But at the end of the day, there has to be some level of trust between the board members and the CEO, founder. Or usually it's still the founder at these days to say, okay, I think this is not going right. We have to pause growth a tad, not stop growth completely, but let's go from, I don't know, take a fake number, 20, let's go from 20% month over month to 5-10% month over month. So we can fix these things. And here's my plan. And then next quarter come back like, okay, did you execute on your plan? Is all going? Are we back on track? And so there has to be this, back and forth going between, these two groups for that to actually work. And I think when you look at the big companies who were able to get to that point, they had that good camaraderie. I mean, occasionally you hear like horror stories and somehow the company still gets big, but I feel like if you look back in the history of business, like that's, that kind of relationship existed. And you often do get founders and board members who just clash, and then, one gets fired, the CEO founder gets fired, or board member has to go, and or they hire someone in and take things over, and all that stuff always happens. But yeah, it's trying to get to that point. And so as thinking back from at the stage of the company that I'm well versed in, which is like pre-Series A seed, when you're about to bring on the first board member, it's so important to do your diligence and making sure that person number one, person number two on your board is like going to be your, you can have that relationship with these people versus just, a lot of founders, especially if it's the first time in, they'll just bring they're like, I want the fanciest person from this firm or that firm. And, sometimes you want maybe the less senior, you want the more junior person because they have more time to work with you or they understand your product. They're a very avid user of the product. One mistakes I thought I made was there was a person who really wanted to be on our board, was a partner at a firm, but was considered junior. And I was like, I need more senior. I want the top dogs of these firms. And, but that person had done their diligence. They had been using the product. They knew everything about, but at the end of the day, have that person, I think with that person, I would have done, who knows where it would have gone, but, I would have had a much better relationship with that person than someone who didn't use the product at all. And, didn't have as much time to help the company because they had 50 other board positions and stuff like that. So I'm rambling at this point, but sort of the ethos of this is like build a board that you can work with.
Yeah, well, it's funny to hear you say that. It's like, you as the founder, what you're saying is do your diligence. It's so often, I think, from the founder's perspective, it's like, oh, they're doing their diligence on us. And
Yes.
you don't think about kind of tit for tat, like, okay, great.
Yeah.
You're asking these questions, I'm asking these questions, because it's a two-way relationship, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. sorry, I was gonna say one last thing. You always want to know, how does this person react when something bad goes on in the company, like growth goes the other way, or what other issue? Like, how did that board member react, and how did they help the company? Because there are some people, you will find plenty of stories where they just reacted horribly, and they're like, that's exactly not the person you want to work with.
Mm. You talk about the notion of like scaling responsibly and having like camaraderie with your board. And I've only read about this. I don't know that it's true, but it makes me think of, the case study of what's his name, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, where it's always that kind of like, hey, like we're not worried about being profitable per se
Yes.
to pay out shareholder dividends, because we're going to reinvest everything. And we're going to be more than just books, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're going to solve our own server problem because, our own web server problem, because that's a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the point where it's like, we're going to build our own logistics system. Like I just had an Amazon guy drop off my package. Like that's a really great testament, I guess, to, synergy and patience and belief in the plan and a vision. And I mean, in a way, it was kind of a family business, wasn't it? Because wasn't it one of his first investors, his parents, I think, at a couple $100,000,
I think so.
something like that. Yeah. So, okay. So fast forward, you go over to the Y Combinator. What's different about the Y Combinator compared to, and first of all, would we call it an incubator? That, and then if so, how's it different than others? If not, why don't we call it that?
I think an incubator, from my perspective anyway, is where you go and you generally, people don't have ideas. They show up as either an individual or as a team, and then they're either given an idea or they sit there and just the incubation period. Whereas I think it's very incubators to me is very hands-on, and they give you extreme amount of guidance and offer you lots of tools and services. Whereas Y Combinator, I think, is more like an accelerator in the sense that, generally speaking, you already have something you're working on. You might completely pivot during your 3-month stay at the program, but you have sort of a problem set you're trying to tackle. You have your own office. Most of the people are just working from home or whatever, and you have your own tools and you're building your own stuff, and you're using YC as a vehicle to help you get further investment, to help you with, they have different kinds of experts to help you get product advice, things that from funding thousands of companies, they can impart knowledge in you, but you're not there a lot. You're actually at home or your office building, and you kind of dip in and out and use their resources as you need them. Whereas, like I said, an incubator is more like it feels like you're just there.
Really. And so you worked with, well, hundreds of founders, I guess, as a mentor. And so what was that relationship like switching from founder entrepreneur and being on the other side, like coach?
Yeah, it's a completely different gig, as you might imagine. It was I think in the beginning I was super fascinated by it because there was just tons of ideas, tons of super engaged, fast moving founders, and they're just working on a vast amount of things. You just, as a partner, you see everything. I think after a while, you sort of start thinking like, oh man, you see people do it, you give them advice, they go build it and do all these things, and you sort of get the itch of like, oh, but I would do it this way, I would do that, and then you try like, oh, I wish I could just build all these things myself. And so I think for the type of, and you see this, there's partners that go for 2 to 3 years and then they leave. And I think those are the people that come in and they start getting that itch almost right away. And then it's almost like they have to go build their own thing because it's not satisfying to just sit there and give advice. But yeah, I thought it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot. I met, I think I had a pretty singular view of how a company could succeed. And by meeting all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds, you sort of see like there's many ways to succeed. There's many personalities. There's all, many ways to put together a startup and have it grow. Yeah. That was
Interesting. Yeah. And so obviously you've got an itch because here you are with InstaLab, and maybe before we dive into that, there was that, that notion, that quote that I said at the beginning, an observation that you made, which is like, yeah, I'll take care of my health when I win my startup, basically. And well, I mean, you look at the math, not everybody succeeds, right? So, and I remember being so silly when I met my to-be wife, I was like, I remember her dropping me off at the airport. Like, I don't know where you think this is going because I'm married to my company. Like, what a dumb thing to say. You know, like I would do anything, weather any storm, because that's what I thought it took. You know, you talk about investors. One of the investors that I should tell a story. Well, forget it. One of my investors. Yeah, exactly. So one of my investors, like, in order to, this was just the silliest. So this is just an example of absolute silliness. You know what? This is going to set up your story well, or your solution well. On the first end, it was, I remember being, I think it was in, where was I? Newport, is that right? No, I'm in Orange County. And you know, he told me the water was shark infested, and he said, depending on how far you go out, that's how many millions I'll give you. Go swim in the water. Let me see how
Keep
brave.
going.
Yeah. And I was trained as a lifeguard, and I competed so I like went out, right? And anyway, I came back in, and that turned into like a $2 million deal, or so I thought. It was like a lot of negotiation and posturing and strong holding on the close. And this is only a seed round, right? You know, like, this is nothing. I remember I was at this Red Bull X Factor athlete training thing, because we had a pilot we were doing with them. We were doing performance DNA stuff, and the deal fell through the day before. So my lawyer told me, and I was like, to the director, I was like, hey, you sponsor high performance athletes. Will you sponsor a high performance entrepreneur? And we were doing, it was breath holds. It was underwater breath hold training, right? Free diving. And he's like, give me a 4-minute breath hold or whatever it was. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, I narrowly missed the margin. It's like 3 minutes and 45 seconds, but the deal ended up closing the next day. But talk about a bunch of stupidity for, you know, a founder, me, to go through at the end of the day. Like, how much strain is that on the mind, the body, the soul? I mean, you're basically being a slave, but it is exactly that. It's like, well, I'll go after this thing and put my life in jeopardy because I believed in what I was doing, but I mean, I don't think that I was doing it for the right reason. So there I am, sacrificing, you know, my health, and that, you know, it's all about, well, I'm going to do all-nighters, and I'm going to do this and that. Anyway, so here's one archetype of an entrepreneur that I think you came across, and you made this observation, like, hey, like, you can't put your health off till later. And so tell us about, you know, maybe your own personal experience with that, or and how, you know, how InstaLab entered the scene.
Yeah. So I think for my first company, I did the whole work 24/7. I mean, not literally, but I basically slept only 4
Yeah.
hours and ate a lot of bad stuff. I was trying to, like, limit my decision fatigue. So, like, my meals were, you know, really bad. Don't even want to describe it, but just same thing, really bad every single day, and gained a bit. I gained like probably 30 pounds. And, you know, I did which we'll talk about later. I did my blood work years after, and it was just clearly a result of downgrading my health. And essentially, it's not that I never say this to say don't work hard. Like, there's working hard, and then there's being smart about it. So, like, building a company is sort of like an endurance sport. Like, you can't sacrifice short-term winners because, you know, well, what's the best way to put it? You can't sacrifice health in the short term because that just leads to long-term failure. And it's not just about long-term, like getting heart disease or whatever, diabetes or whatever it is you could do from eating bad and not exercising and not sleeping, but it's also it's also short-term, actually. It's cognitive performance. And so an example is, like, sometimes after pulling all-nighters for weeks, I would, you know, I'd have a board meeting, and, like, the whole entire board meeting, I'm not exactly sure what I'm saying the whole entire, because I got brain fog. And so it just impacts you in a pretty overall way. And I could have gotten much more out of that if I had slept for 6 hours a night, 6 to 8 hours a night, and still worked just as hard. And so I sort of see it now as, like, you should treat people tend to, especially first time founders and very young first time founders, they tend to just throw health aside, but you got to treat your body like it's a valuable business asset, because it is. And, like, just like you wouldn't ignore your company's finances or your customers, you can't just ignore your body's operating systems. You need to prioritize sleep and optimize nutrition and exercise, all for the short-term cognitive performance, but also for your long-term health. So, as you said earlier, maybe off camera, but, you know, you're a prime entrepreneur who can build many great things. why cut off your life by 20 years by doing stuff today? And so I think a lot of burnout comes from, just chronic overextension and lack of recovery, not just working hard 24/7. So I think there are things you can do to scale yourself and design systems to protect you, protect your energy and focus. So, I mean, just things like, delegate, at some point you've been, one of the common things is if you work by yourself or in a very small company, very scrappy for too long, and then you raise like $2 million. If you do that for too long, what I've noticed, it's hard for people to start delegating. But once you got that money in the door, you got to start delegating, sourcing, hire people, so you don't hit a breaking point and doing things you don't have to be doing. There's also, I talked about limiting decision fatigue, but in the right way. So, like foods, workouts, stuff like that. Like you don't want to always be thinking about it. Just create a routine and do it. And so that it helps you in the long term. And the other thing is just optimizing things like deep work. Context switching kills productivity a ton. And so there's actually Paul Graham. He's the founder of YC. He has this amazing essay from many years ago. I forgot what it's actually called, but the basic premise is there's a maker schedule and there's a manager schedule. And you gotta, if possible, each day should be just dedicated to one of those things if you're a manager, because there are different parts of the brain that you're using. Or for someone who is actively managing other people and can't get out of meetings, then like one half of your day for meetings and then the other half of the day for like deep, solo work. So anyway, the idea there is, you can work very hard, you can be very disciplined, you can still grind, but you don't have to be, killing yourself in the long term or in the short term as also if you just apply some principles to what you're doing. So anyway, that goes, I'm trying to segue this into InstaLab. But I mean, all these things I've just come across now, and I'm just thinking through how I could have been still working hard and but being better with my health is a result of after Homejoy, I just felt horrible. And I started looking into my health because I had all this time now. And one of the things that I really ran into was trying to understand my health. And so I got a primary care physician at a what they call themselves a forward-thinking practice. So I went to them, and I went to them with a list of tests I wanted to get done. And they were like, you're too young for those tests. I was maybe 30 at the time. Your insurance won't cover it. They gave me a list of reasons to do, and I was a little bit, okay, fine, if you really say that. And then I looked more into it. And by the way, these tests are very straightforward. It's like ApoB, stuff like that. And after 6 months of just pushing back, they finally gave me the order for it. So there was this gatekeeping that my physician was doing on me that was incredibly frustrating. Anyway, fast forward, I did the test, and lo and behold, red everywhere. And I'm just imagining if I had waited another 10 years not getting those tests done and realizing, and by the way, by that time I thought I was being healthy with a certain diet, but in actuality, that was actually not helping me, that I would probably have active heart disease right now. And all these things. And so InstaLab came out of just frustration with the healthcare system because it's completely broken, ass backwards. A lot. I mean, as you know, there's maybe the audience probably knows. It isn't working. We're always working for it. Like we're always working to get something from it, and it's very frustrating. So like we're not getting red tape. We're waiting for physician approvals. We're always told what we can and cannot access. The system dictates our choices and limits our options, and it keeps us from fully taking ownership of our health. And so the purpose of InstaLab is to completely flip that script. It's sort of like asking the question, what if the healthcare system actually worked for you? Like it would be, for most people, it's like we'd be proactive, it would be accessible, and you would just be able to get what you needed to get. And so, sorry, I'm not on a soapbox now, but the thing I think beyond just not having access to those tests, it's also that we're fighting against is people have been conditioned to think they shouldn't have access to good proactive healthcare. The traditional medicine and insurance system has really boxed us in, and they've created these rules that restrict us from really powerful and sometimes very actually affordable life-saving tools if we just had access to them. And so one example that's really popular with our patients is coronary calcium scan. It's a quick scan takes 10 minutes and one of the most powerful ways to detect early active heart disease. And it literally saved lives. We have patients who scored in the thousands, had to send them to an immediately to cardiologist to get another test done and then bypass surgery. It's like, had they not gone to us and get like, where else would they have gone? And I'm actually not quite sure. So this test saves lives if you do it. Yet most doctors won't order it for you. And it's because, like I said, the system isn't designed to be preventive. And the reality is, like, this tests in some areas, I think in Illinois, it costs like 40, 50 bucks. And in some places, it costs anywhere from 40, 50 bucks to, unfortunately, 200 bucks in some other places. So it's affordable to a set of people, but you still need a doctor's approval, like I said, to get it. And then when you get the courage to ask, a lot of people are actually denied. And so InstaLab is we're just like, that's absurd. This is all absurd. We reject that approach. If a test can give you critical insights into your health, you should be able to access it. There should be no gatekeeping, no unnecessary barriers, no waiting for permission. And so coming back to what InstaLab exactly is, so we're trying to put, like I said, the healthcare back in the power of your hands. So you can book tests without waiting for approvals. You can find out what's actually wrong with you before it becomes an actual problem. That's what as it's being really said loud and clear now, the current system is good for sick care. Once you get sick, there's a pathway there. But before you get sick, there's really no path. Mm-hmm. So it's creating. And the other things we help people do is you get connected to the right specialists when you need expert guidance. So if like something gets flagged in the blood panel or an attack or whatever, we'll send you to the right person. And just above all, just being able to, we want to be the place where you can leverage all the tools that are available to you. Well, actually, they're all available to you in some sense, have been all available to you all along. It's just, you don't know where to find it. Or there's a physician that's, in front of it from letting you get access to it. And so our hope is just like people track their fitness, their steps, track your finances. Everyone really tracks their finances. Like, we should build a system in which encourages people to track their health. And so that's the problem InstaLab, and the solution that we're trying to come across is just become this place where you come to us healthy and you stay with us healthy. Yeah. And by the way, we're not trying to replace doctors at all. We're staffed with physicians. We send people to the specialists when our physicians aren't able to handle it or aren't experts in it. And we're just in general here to make healthcare work for people.
Got it. Couple of things. So there's a difference between population health and precision health,
mm-hmm.
right? And not to be confused with private health, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say government subsidized health or private health. And maybe let's use a tier that like everybody could understand. An astronaut's health profile, it's very particular, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Like what they need to know to blast off. And then what that needs to be monitored while they're in the space station, let's say, right? And it's like, okay, well, you might say, well, yeah, but you're not an astronaut. So, okay, maybe not. On the flip side, it's, essentially dumbing down or creating a consensus of a one size fits all kind of battery of options and not opening up Pandora's box because, well, what do you know? And I understand from a physician's point of view, like, when WebMD came out, I was like, oh, it's a nightmare. When Google, right? So everybody's an expert all of a sudden. And it's like, well, they're not, because, you as the patient, you don't know what you don't know. You didn't do the years of professional training to practice medicine. But, information access now is different. And I'd say it's a blessing and a curse, because how do you know what's true? Mm-hmm. That's a real thing, that paradigm that we're going through right now. But because you're being sold stuff, right? And these companies that sell tests want to turn a profit. It's like, do I need this, this MTHFR supplement? Yeah. This is everything you're saying, the symptoms that you point to, it's like 90% of people have those anyway, but is it for the same source, right? So so there is this like kind of, so on the one hand, it's like population health, status quo, sick care. We're not going to, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And then the thing is, it might break and it's unfixable because we waited. On the other extreme, it's like putting astronauts into space, but we invest $1 billion on that. So, we gotta, deal with that risk on the health side. But, and then now you've got these, entrepreneurs that I kind of compare them to like athletes, where it's like, if, certain inflammatory markers are up, odds are you're going to get injured and your career is over.
Mhm.
You're literally going to break probably in practice. You probably won't even make it in competition. But it's the same kind of thing with entrepreneurs because they're under a ton of stress, right? And,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think one of the things that we talked about at the top of the call was, yeah, like Einstein died of a brain aneurysm. What if we had 10 more years for Einstein? What if I
Mhm.
don't know about jobs? I mean, I think I had pancreatic cancer. I don't know how preventable that would have been. But, there are things that if we're tracking your so-called normal,
Mhm.
uh, and trying to get it back to optimal.
Mhm.
Uh, and by the way, you're optimal because that's something different too,
Right.
right? If you just use population health and gosh, like that keeps slipping because I think it's like 85% of people have comorbidities, not just one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And so like, is that the new standard? Is that the new health? It's like, and I mean, I felt the effects of that when I went into the hospital with appendicitis. At the time, I was
Mhm.
tuned. I was training as an athlete. My resting heart rate was 40. They checked me out. They're like, oh, you only had 80. You're fine. It's, whatever.
Mhm.
So they triaged me and I stayed overnight and my appendix burst open,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, we're at this age where one of the things that you said is like, we're going to get you when you're healthy. We're going to keep you healthy. But the thing is now, so that takes foresight, that takes maturity, that takes proactivity around this thing that you believe is invincible. It's like
Mhm.
athletes don't seek this stuff out until they get an injury, unless
Mhm.
they're a really good coach, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's what we're talking around. Maybe there are like founder coaches like you've been in the past. Say,
Mhm.
hey, cool, you got a great idea. Take care of the temple,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
exactly it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
because there isn't any human resource for the founder, right?
No.
Like
No.
there's no policy, nothing like that, and it's like there is this culture of kill yourself to make it happen kind of thing. How does that
There's
work?
all, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think you're right. There's a lot of people overselling tests, supplements, medications, all these things. People hear it, they'll listen to a podcast, and then they'll go start doing it, and then they have no clue if it's working or not. I've seen people come to us supplements mile high and some like their liver enzymes are off, and you're just like, we got it. Like
yeah,
it's really hard to figure out which of those supplements, if any of those supplements are impacting it, if you're doing that much at once.
yeah,
I think there's definitely, yeah, a lot of people, I think sometimes one criticism of testing companies is over testing. I think though our approach has always been there's a standard amount of tests you should be doing. These are screenings, like cancer screenings and all these. Love like do that. And then there are these tests that you can't get otherwise through your own primary care doctor that all should do that they're not going to provide you because they're just used to saying no to. And then there's like 90% of other tests that you probably shouldn't worry about. We never when people ask us about tests and they really want to do it, we will go order it for them. But we generally are not. If you look at the recommendation, when you sign up as a member, you tell us a little about yourselves, and we output a list of tests you should be doing that year. And if you're young, that test list is like three items long. If you're older, 40s, 50s, that depending on your history and your previous test results, that list can balloon up to like a dozen or so. And we try to stack rank it. And so we definitely are. I agree. Like there is something called over testing and just finding things that you know you find and like what do you do with it? There's nothing to do with it. It's just like a normal finding. And the same with supplements. I will say test supplements, all those things. We don't actually, as a company, we don't make money off of it because we make money off of like memberships and things like that and giving people that access and helping them interpret results and things like that. Uh, because which we're probably making less money as a result of doing that, but we want to make sure that our values and our incentives are aligned with the patients and their outcomes.
yeah,
And the other thing, by the way, and the other thing that I think traditional medicine doctors really hate about taking tests outside of the usual is they always say, what if the patient gets this value and they're going to freak out. They're not going to know what to do with it. And I'm always just like, well, if you're ordering a test, then you're responsible for explaining the result to them in a way that makes them understand. And so that is, that is what we do, is we explain all these abnormal findings and try to contextualize everything and
Yeah.
what you should care about and what you should just like ignore or don't worry about for now.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's running a testing company, like they should, I get frustrated when there's companies, and we get a lot of people come to us. They have all these results from another testing company, and they're just like, "Can you tell me what to do with this?" Because that company didn't explain it to them well or at all. They just give them the values, and I don't think that's the right approach. I understand how it's harder and less money to make by having to do all that work for them, but I feel that is what these companies should be doing, and they aren't doing.
Well, yeah. And so I want to just kind of pause and make sure we hit that in terms of aligning short-term
Yeah.
gain with long-term vision, because that's really important. Because I think something that's unique about InstaLab is you're really test agnostic, lab agnostic, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's not putting one test ahead of the other. I would assume there's probably some, quality analysis that you're doing to even get into your marketplace in the first place, but it's not about a revenue share on kits, because the value that you add is the amalgamation of the data,
Right.
single source of truth, and probably with the caveat of understanding, hey, these are from different labs, so you got to account for you know those discrepancy, which is why more data over time. But then you've got, effectively, I think we're moving toward the interoperability of different data sources all in one place. And then potentially you've got LLMs that you can plug in from different experts, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, oh, well, here's all the data. Here it's all corrected and normalized, harmonized. And okay, I'm an entrepreneur, 30-year-old female, and here's my current state, here's my goals. Okay, cool. That's an LLM made by this expert that you can plug in,
Mhm.
versus the like 18-year-old, track star that wants to win a gold medal at the 2028 Olympics, for example. Like that's just,
Well,
it's going to be a completely different action plan, right? And I think
yeah.
that's the thing that's always been, I think, the struggle for a lot of these different companies. It's like, oh, here's the result, and here's the thing that you should do. Like, I don't even
Mhm.
know who you are. All I have is this one biomarker test on you.
Yep.
I don't know anything about your health history. So I guess you can understand the reservations for, let's say, your medical practitioners, your general practitioners, but that's if you can even get one of those. So
Yep.
it's there. It seems to me like with telemedicine and telehealth and these memberships and doctors going online, there's potential for a really interesting synergy here, because if you can provide a service like this to practitioners who are either bricks and mortar or
Yes.
fully digital, it's like, wow, you just like 10 or 100x how much change I can affect, right?
Mhm.
Because I can scale what I learned in medical school. I can turn it into a mental model. Um, I can expose what those rules are. I can identify what their shortcomings are, so I can actually, take care of that issue of like misdiagnosis or, practitioner error. I can like collaborate LLMs. Like it's pretty amazing the precipice that we're standing on now in terms of like the ability to really contextualize our health over time. Yeah.
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 Yeah, we actually work with a few physicians who send their patients to us purely because we make it super. It's super. The compliance rate of getting the test done is much higher if you go through this, because we'll book the test and we'll get you and we'll schedule it and we'll figure out all the pricing up front, and that is, and then so we're really excited actually about building up that part. But yeah, there's a lot of synergies between us and physicians, and we don't presume that we will be the physician on record all the time. For
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is really, if we go back to the mission that we were talking about beforehand, it's like, how do you extend health span? That is, how do you extend the time that an individual has to be in their zone of genius, contributing to the goodness in the world? And I think it's a conflict between the tech that you're making, the high tech, and then the high touch of all these, really well trained practitioners who don't need to be afraid. Like I remember when I had a, post-operatively, I had a surgery on my knee, and the physio put together my rehab plan, and then I was like, cool. I looked at it, and then I put in my own prompt on my GPT, and I was like, here's the one
Yeah,
I, and she's like, oh my god,
it's
it took me
yeah.
3 hours to make yours. you have that. And I'm like, yeah, but I only knew what to prompt because of my relationship with you.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. So it's like now you can make these in 3 minutes, not 3 hours.
Yep.
So it's like framing that, to the practitioners, like, hey, this isn't going to replace you. This is going to help you reach orders
Yeah.
of magnitude more people, which is
Yeah.
really exciting. So do you find that practice? It seems like you're finding that practitioners are open to this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, I think the coolest tool that we use for on our provider side and with physicians we work with as clients are these AI tools that are being built for them. And one example is I don't know if you heard of Clearly. It's an analysis, a plaque analysis. They do more plaque and stenosis analysis for CT coronary angiograms. So there's CACS, which looks at calcified plaque, and then there's another test that includes calcified plaque that looks at soft plaque and narrowing of the arteries. It's considered by far much better test to be doing if you're going to choose between the two, but it's just 10x more expensive, unfortunately.
Mhm.
But if you go do that test, usually you got like a radiologist or maybe a cardiologist looking at you and an outputting report to the provider. That's very technical speak, and most primary care providers can probably read through it and then speak to their patient, but it's jargon, and the patient for sure can't read it. But what Clearly does is they use AI to look at the images, get a much more precise look at the arteries.
Mhm.
They can read out things more, and then they actually put it into reports that any primary care provider, any physician can look at, and any technical patient can look at, and just know immediately how bad things are, where in my arteries are things going wrong, what do I do? What do I need to do next? And so, before, when you thought maybe you had heart disease, you would probably send them to a cardiologist to go first get a consultation done with, and dot dot dot. Now a primary care provider physician, or a concierge physician, can go send that person straight to the angiogram, get the report back, and be able to give advice on like treatments essentially.
Yeah.
And it's just be able to anyway, like, there are all these other tools. Like, I know a lot of physicians, they have a lot of hard time. They have to write notes, they have to summarize notes, they don't have all the context when they show up to a, a patient visit. These are all things AI, or I think, is going to just fast track and make physicians so much more efficient and so much more valuable, because they can spend more time doling out and explaining things versus doing you know
Yeah.
doing administrative stuff.
Yeah. So I get where that's going. I wonder. So take like a radiologist, for example, right? Like
Mhm.
they're going to look at your MRI or your X-ray with their expertise, and they're going to interpret. But basically, what we're saying is the AI can take that role
Mhm.
eventually one day, and okay, maybe I'm not sure what the radiologist does then, but let's just say they still have a job and they interpret.
You always need I think, a human view. Yeah, you
Yeah.
always need someone to check out quality control.
Well, okay. So right, you become QC. Oh well, so there. I think that answered the question. Is now you're serving 100 patients a day through your office instead of 10. Um,
I think,
so
yeah.
yeah. I guess it's just like coming to a certain level of comfort with these machines, and I guess it's no different, right? Like
Mhm.
when you think about, well, first there were X-rays, and then there were CT scans, and then there was MRIs, and there's like a kind of a period of, well, professional expertise that you've got to accumulate over time. Who knew they would be so digital, which is incredible. So,
Yeah.
okay, I think we've kind of talked in like how disruptive in a good way. I think this is in
Yeah.
terms of getting people
Yeah.
access to, and it sounds like more affordable care. As the technology get implemented. So, okay, in terms of you kind of talked about the way you structure your business, the way you do, that is you're test agnostic, and you're not about trying to make money on tests. You're making money on value in terms of the insights that come from the analysis, and that's in the form of a membership. And so you're tracking towards some kind of North Star, right?
Mhm.
What's the bigger picture, the kind of bigger vision, that you see with InstaLab? And I know we started on founders, so I'm assuming there's probably something there with
Mhm.
health and some kind of value translation to the greater good. What's your
Mhm.
vision of success with InstaLab?
I want it to be the proactive healthcare system that we all want, like the whole entire thing. And it's like, that's the big idea 10 years from now. And, we started with a tiny blood test and we're expanding more and more. And so in what format that comes through, the healthcare system is many things. There's pharma, insurance,
Yeah.
actual physicians and hospitals and stuff like that. And so still trying to figure out what the end thing is. But overall, I want to be that place people come first to understand their health and for any budget. And so one of the things that we're going to do soon is like, how much can you spend this year? $100, $10,000, anywhere in between. You tell us what that number is. You tell us who you are, and we're going to tell you, okay, do this, do these 3 things, or do whatever X things, and get you on a track to understand your health and not end up, I say, okay, I said sort of like the product end goal there, but ultimately the value here at the end is cardiovascular disease, number one cause of death in the world. That should be, or sorry, in the US, in the world too, but the US also should be way down a list. Should be off of the top 10 list. Cancer, in terms of deaths, off the top 10 list. All these things should just not be that high because they're all, for the most part, some things are not preventable, but they can be detected early enough to not cause death. And yeah, and if I had honestly an immediate first goal of like what disease to tackle, it would probably be heart attacks and strokes. It'd be heart disease because that can be I know people have looked at this for a long time, but that is just frighteningly the solutions and tools are there. They exist now. We don't need to invent new things. We just need to get people tested early enough and on a treatment track. And we would eliminate that for sure.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. So, okay, you remember I said there were 3 things that I was going to ask you again at the end. I think you've already said the one thing that, people need to hear is like, well, this thing, this killer is totally preventable. And so let's prevent it. I guess so the second question is, who needs to hear that?
Well, my own, I mean, it's everyone would be. I think there are people who. I think there is a set of people who are just not going to care, and I'm just like, there's always some percentage of people who are, going to live in health and work, just living for the now. But I think more and more people are listening to these podcasts and listening to a lot of stuff and don't know where to go, and that's sort of who we want to capture at this point. Is you kind of know you need to be healthy, you don't know exactly what it is. Okay, come to us and do that. In terms of people like trying to get them to be proactive, I view it as kind of my sort of social circle at this point is entrepreneurs, folks in business and stuff like that. But obviously I would like to, we've talked about this offline, is we get a lot of non-founders, non-entrepreneurs, non-business people, non-executives through their families. So one, person in the family figures out this, and then he wants the rest of the family to get tested. And so kind of that's how we spider out from there.
Well, I mean, that's a really, great, I mean, I think that's a really great tech because I mean, I think about, well, how I was when I was an entrepreneur 10 years ago versus how I am now as a dad. And it's like, well, I want my daughter to have a PhD in her own body by the time she's like 12. Like, so she understands how it works, understands like how to measure what matters in a healthful way. And, knows where to, get those things. Like we shouldn't just be limited to a scale. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Begging your way. So, and I think, parents are, looking to do the best and it's not the easiest, in terms of, well, just even different product availability, like food product availability.
Right.
But how do you discern from what's marketing as healthy, which is versus what's actually healthy? And and how do you enter into a conversation in a partnership with your primary caregiver versus, kind of this top down approach that we've had in the past, which I think again for sick care and reactive, like if I break my leg, I get in a car accident, like I totally want that system. It's not a criticism. I think then I think maybe society and myself guilty, but is maybe expecting too much of those people that are there for the emergency. Like I'm not going to ask the firefighter to build my house. That's not what they're trained for. So I think there is like a need that has emerged. Especially since we start to get into quality of life. As a priority. Things like the fact that health span is even a word is really interesting. So So, okay, well, that's great. And so, yeah, the last question is, now that we've had this conversation, who would you nominate to be on the DNA of things?
I think I can't say his name, but I'll definitely introduce you to him. You work with a lot of athletes too, so we actually do a lot of testing for our professional athletes.
Okay.
And there is this trainer that is super gung ho on, athletes when they go to their teams, they only test for certain things and they're not testing for long term health. But he's been on a kick of just like getting his athletes on this long term health kick and to make sure, like, when you retire, you don't want to like arteries clogged up because you just didn't look at it. And I think he would be perfect for you to chat with, given your intersection of athletes and
Amazing.
longevity and all that stuff.
Well, I'll connect with you offline on
Yeah.
on the contact. And just quick question, Adora, just for the listeners, how do people find you? Regardless as to they're athlete, artist, entrepreneur, family member, biohacker, whatever. You're obviously InstaLab, but serve them. Where do folks find you?
You can email. I think the best way, honestly, is email me.
Okay.
I live in my inbox, adora@instalab.com. And I have a bunch of socials, but I honestly don't keep track of it too much. Yeah, so email's the best way.
Awesome. Okay, I'll make sure that I put all that in the show notes. Adora, thank you so much for joining me today. It was a delightful conversation. I learned a lot, and I know our listeners will too. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
All right. Today, Adora Cheung showed us that building the future shouldn't mean breaking yourself. Founders, you don't just need capital, you need clarity on your own biology, your individual biology. And the best entrepreneurs aren't the ones who sacrifice everything, they're the ones who optimize for the long game. If this conversation helps you better understand yourself or someone you know and love, and they need to hear it, please share with a fellow friend, founder, creator, or leader, because when we prioritize health span over hustle, we don't just extend our own runway, we reshape the future with clarity, strength, and sustainability, not just for ourselves, by the way, but for those who will be affected by the ripple effect of our innovation. So thank you all for joining. And, please, if you think about it, hit a 5-star review on either Apple or Spotify, and actually check out the DNA things on Substack. Got a ton of great information there that we are publishing, and resources to help you understand what makes you uniquely you, and so that you can start living more by design and less by default.